For folks who don't know, just give us your background and your background with the vaccine.
Okay, I'm an infectious disease doc. I trained in public health at the CDC in Atlanta. That CDC we're hearing so much about these days.
Yes.
Yeah, I cut my teeth on public health at CDC. And with respect to the pandemic and the vaccine, I was a vaccine trial participant. So even though I'm a doctor, I thought it was important for me to lead by example and show people the process. So I broadcast my experience on social media, on Twitter and on Instagram to show people what was actually happening in the research study and allow people to ask questions. So I'm happy to be here and help clear up some of the misinformation.
Thank you. So yesterday we had a caller, Charlotte from California. What's up, Charlotte? And she did not want to get vaccinated, and she had some passionate opinions. And I want to play a clip of Miss Charlotte talking. And I would love for you, because folks may not believe me, I'm just on the radio, but you are a doctor, you are part of the clinical trials, and maybe they'll hear it better from you, and you can give us some facts and information. Listen to Miss Charlotte from California yesterday.
I don't believe in it. It's just too soon for this vaccine. We have dealt with so many lies from the government for us that we don't know what to believe. And I just don't believe that it's the right time. It's too soon. So I've chosen personally not to take the vaccine. And that's my opinion. And that's just, my choice.
That is your choice.
Right. And so I just think that we have accepted a lot of things in life that we've been given. And I just think that we can't continue to, badmouth one another when we've made that choice to take it or not to take it. And that's all that I'm saying. So when I hear our people, just, calling people stupid and dumb and ignorant and, just being disrespectful because they're making that choice, that's unfair because we've all making a choice in our lives. And we shouldn't judge each other because we've chosen not to take.
All right. So Miss Charlotte talked about too soon, lies, and that we are accepting things. We have accepted things in life from the government specifically. I'm not about calling folks stupid unless you're upholding white supremacy, like some of these Republicans. Then I might do that. But I'm not about calling folks stupid who have fears, who have hesitancy. But address that. Address too soon, lies, and accepting things from the government.
Yeah, Clay, I've been talking to people throughout this pandemic, not necessarily on the radio and on television, but actually in person, on the ground, or talking to people virtually one-on-one to find out what their concerns are. And I think the first thing, I agree with Miss Charlotte that there's no place for us to be demeaning in our response to people who won't get vaccinated. I think we have to understand why they have that position, because let's be honest, there is a reason to be distrustful of the healthcare system, historically and even now. But that aside, I think we have to put those things in perspective with what's happening right now. We have a pandemic that has disproportionately affected Black people, Black and brown people, but particularly Black people. And when we ask why that is, it actually has nothing to do with the vaccine. In fact, the vaccine is the reason we're seeing such a drastic decrease in the number of cases. But when we think about Tuskegee, because this comes up all the time, when people are asking me, well, why should I take a vaccine because of Tuskegee? I think if we put that in perspective, we realize we have to remind people, first of all, Tuskegee was not about vaccines. It was about withholding treatment from Black people. This vaccine is giving us an opportunity to take something that will help us get back to normal, keep us out of the ICU, keep us from dying. Sure, there are still a few people who may end up in the hospital after vaccination with COVID-19, but it pales in comparison. So when people talk about Tuskegee, I want them to realize we're really talking about apples and oranges. Tuskegee is the reason I felt comfortable being in the clinical trial, because It was because of Tuskegee. Now we require what's called informed consent. So no one can take advantage of you ever again, like they took advantage of those men in the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. You can raise your hand and volunteer, and even after you do so, you can still say, no, thank you. So the distrust she's talking about, on one hand, it's understandable, but I think it's also a little misplaced if you are saying these vaccines are creating guinea pigs out of Black people. Because I hear that also. I don't want to take the vaccine because I don't want to be a guinea pig. Nearly 200 million people have been vaccinated, and most of those are not Black people. 10% of the people who've been vaccinated so far, around 10%. Black people. So who else is getting vaccinated? It's not us. So if there's a guinea pig, it's really not us. And then finally, I want to address her comment about it happened too fast, because I hear this a lot too, and we've heard it a lot on the street as a reason people are distrustful. And sometimes I'll ask them, well, how long should it take to develop a vaccine? And there's no set hard and fast answer. But what I know about why these vaccines came to us so quickly is because people volunteered in unprecedented numbers to be in the trials. Normally, it can take years to get enough people in a research study. A lot of the paperwork and the administrative costs and timelines associated with research, all that was, really reduced because we're in a global pandemic. The government paid for the vaccines. Normally, companies have to raise the money. They have to do things in a certain way until they have enough funding to make sure someone will buy the vaccine. And that can take time. And then finally, messenger RNA, it's actually not new. They've been working on it for a long time. So if you put all those things together, it explains why we have a vaccine so quickly. And I think had this not been politicized, people would be rejoicing at the medical advancement we are experiencing right now related to this vaccine. So, it showed what's possible, this collaboration we saw to produce the vaccine. So I'm glad it went fast, and I'm glad I'm vaccinated. So I think we just have to answer people's questions when they have concerns like it went too fast. I don't want to be a guinea pig and so on. We have to answer them in the spirit of love.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you bring up, it's messenger what is it? RNA? Am I saying it right?
Messenger RNA, which is inside all of our bodies all the time, doing all sorts of things, giving instructions to do things. And that's all messenger RNA does. So the beauty of messenger RNA is that they can teach this piece of messenger RNA in the lab. I mean, this is really some sci-fi stuff that we normally would be really in awe of.
Right. And they've been working on it for years and years and years. It just happened
30 years ago, they started working on it. It's been in other vaccines. It's been in humans before. And that's
folks think it happened last year. They think messenger RNA happened last year.
It just happened last year. But a lot of the misinformation out there from people who appear credible makes it seem as though this is brand new. Right. And they use language like it's a new technology. And even some of the scientists are using this word technology. And I think that's a miscommunication, because it gives people this perception that there's something nefarious going on. Like the people who are talking about microchips, I think that came from this languaging around this technology. It's never been used before. It's never been in humans before. And none of that is true.
So I want to go to some calls. We have tons of calls coming in, but I want to ask you a couple things. One of the things that I've heard is that, well, the vaccines have emergency approval, but they don't have FDA approval. And I'm afraid to take it because it's emergency FDA approval, but not official FDA approval. So explain people who are afraid because it doesn't have the official FDA approval.
Yeah, and I would say people are justified in being confused about this, particularly people who historically don't trust the government. And the difference between an emergency use authorization and an FDA approval really boils down to administrative check boxes. So what's important to know, the similarity between an EUA and an FDA approval is that the science has to be conducted. So the research has to be conducted in the same way to demonstrate the treatment, the vaccine, the medication is effective. The emergency use authorization was used because we're in a global pandemic, and it allowed them to, and when people say they skipped steps, they may have skipped some administrative steps, like physically going to the lab to look and do what we call a site visit. But the part we really needed them to be focused and on point with was the science part, which is conducting the research in the lab and in humans the way in a way that's very, very rigorous, in a way that's trustworthy and credible. And that has to happen to get an EUA and an FDA approval. So I think, the FDA has not been as forthcoming as they need to be to help people understand this distinction, because the distinction is actually not about the science. We have the science already. It showed that these vaccines are very effective.
All right. Other big question that we're hearing is that there are people who have died from the vaccine. There are people who have gotten an enlarged heart. According to, I think the CDC, they're saying it's possible 12,000 people may have died from vaccine complications, but they aren't exactly sure. They just have to report that. But there are people who have said, I know somebody who has died from the vaccine. I'm not going to get it because of that. And there have been some news reports out there. I had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I feel fine, but there were some reports of blood clots. We all know that. So what do you say to people that say, I know people who have died from this vaccine, and I'm afraid that I might die from it?
I can never discount someone's experience or their beliefs, but the truth is, if someone has died from a vaccine, there's really no way for us to prove that. And so I don't want to say absolute, there's no way I could say absolutely not, that's not true. But what I want to remind people, especially people who are already taking other medications for health conditions or who've had other vaccines, they all have side effects. They all have side effects. Think about those commercials you see on TV for the medications. At the end of that commercial with the people skipping through the tulips in the field and smiling, at the end of that commercial, what do? They rattle off this long list of very scary side effects. And it's because there needs to be transparency about what's possible. And so we have seen side effects from these vaccines, and that's to be expected. But it pales in comparison to, first, the likelihood that any of those things could happen even without a vaccine. But it also pales in comparison to the number of people who die from COVID-19 or end up in the ICU for a long time, and then they have a long-term disability as a result of it. So this is what we mean when we say people have to, assess their own personal risk. What are you willing to take a chance on? Are you willing to take a chance on getting COVID-19 and being hospitalized, being in the ICU, or even dying from COVID-19, or taking a risk on a vaccine with over 200 million shots given? And even if we had 12,000 deaths we could prove, that number is a lot smaller than the number of people we've seen die from COVID-19.
It's kind of like my friend was saying this yesterday. It's kind of like getting in a plane. There is a possibility that plane might go down. It might, but this rarely happens. It's so minimal. It's tiny. I have a fear of flying. I get in that plane, and you do it. There is a possibility you get in that car, there might be an accident. There are several car accidents every single day, but you do these things. And I try and tell folks that you got to look at it that way. And I know folks who are getting on a plane, not wearing a mask, don't have a vaccine. And a friend of mine, she got the coronavirus from it.
Mm-hmm.
She was sick. So come on now.
But
Let's
Clay,
go to some
those risky things we do day in and day out,
yeah.
we're not bombarded with images and conversations about those things over and over and over again on the television, on social media. I mean, social media has so much misinformation. I saw an ad on Instagram that said in capital letters, humongous, don't let them vaccinate you. And there's just so much misinformation there. I think there are so many things we don't know. I know there's a lot of pushback because we aren't talking about some of the potentially beneficial holistic treatments for COVID-19. That can still be helpful, but it doesn't negate the need for us to think about vaccinations and accepting vaccinations. Like, why can't we do both?
We could do both. I do my oil of oregano. I do my echinacea. I do my vitamin C. I do my turmeric powder. Oh, I do it all. And I got the vaccine. Let's go to some calls.
Yeah.
Let's go to some calls. Let me see here. Let's go to Michelle, Alabama. Your question quickly.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Michelle, what's up?
So I think it's a valid concern when it comes to people who have died. And that's definitely one of my concerns. And what I would like to know from a medical standpoint, how can there be guarantees that you will not die from the vaccine? Because for me, thus far, I've changed my social behavior, and that has prevented me from getting COVID-19. So when I compare just changing my social behavior to potentially getting the vaccine and dying, okay, which one do you think I'm going to choose?
Okay, I think the doctor already addressed that, but if you can just tackle that one more time, what can you say about the fear that she might die from the vaccine compared to just doing social
well,
distancing?
nothing's 100%. People have died from complications of taking an aspirin.
Yeah.
So any medication out there is going to have some side effects, and they could end up, in death. So there's no guarantee for anything, but I would just ask people who have this concern to weigh whether or not you're someone who's likely to end up in the hospital or dying from COVID. And we have a lot of information about that now. But even with this Delta variant, we're seeing in younger people who are, pretty healthy compared to the people we saw at the beginning of the epidemic or the pandemic dying. There are no guarantees that you won't die if you get COVID-19. So again, that is a person's personal decision. However, if someone chooses not to get vaccinated, part of our social contract, this sort of unwritten social contract we have with each other as humans on the planet together, is that we each do our part. So if you're someone who's not vaccinated, it's your responsibility to check in with your health every day and make sure you don't have a new symptom. And if you do, stay away from people until you figure out if you have COVID-19. If you have COVID-19, then you have to stay away from people until you're better, because that's how COVID-19 continues to spread, from people who have the infection and they're giving it to other people. And I think we don't talk enough about that as well. It's like we can't talk about everything, all that we talk about one issue at a time, when we should still be talking about, we know how this is transmitted. We know how to prevent it. We know where to get vaccinated. So we need to be talking about all these things until the pandemic is over.
And one thing I would say, Michelle, we have other calls, but I would just add that I think what we have to, I'm going to die from the vaccine. Is that a rational fear? Is that rational? Again, I have a fear of flying. I know it's different, but when I get in a plane, am I really going to die in this plane crash? Is that rational? So is it a rational fear, or is it a propaganda fear? Is it a misinformation fear? Because I don't know anybody who has died from the vaccine. I have it, and I got the Johnson & Johnson. So we have to, and I had COVID, Michelle. I don't want to have COVID again. And I know friends who have abs, who are 6'2", who are 32 years old. They got COVID and they were out. They were out. They were begging for their life. So I'm just saying, you got to make your decision. I just want us to be informed, and that's why we have the doctor here. Let's go to Jason, the Bronx.
I just want people to remember, you're more likely to die of COVID-19 than you are getting a vaccine, even if those deaths truly were linked to the vaccine. We have people dying of things all the time. My cousin recently died in her sleep, and it wasn't related to the COVID-19 vaccine. So these things happen, and we have to be mindful not to attach the vaccine to these things that could be happening coincidentally.